Those same white eyes, fixed in the dark, unblinking. The blood on the floor formed a perfect line, leading somewhere. We thought the diary was the last piece of evidence, but then, this surfaced. Watch closely. Every shadow, every flicker matters. And if you notice something we miss, leave a comment. Maybe together we can see what it's really doing. Security Camera 2, Glenwood Motel, Room 6, October 17th, 2:11 a.m., infrared mode active. The feed picks up exactly where the last recording ended. The screen starts black, just the soft hiss of an active feed before the picture resolves. The transition is quick, a single flicker, and then the room appears. It's a wide, static overhead view from the upper corner, infrared mode rendering everything in a washed-out green-gray. The sharp edges of objects are outlined in the cold light, every detail stripped of warmth. The room is small, square, and tired. The walls are blotched with stains that creep upward like dried seepage. The carpeted section is worn thin, seams fraying into the tile near the doorway. A curtain hangs heavy over the single window, the fabric thick with dust. The hem shifts occasionally, lifting and falling with pulses of air that don't seem tied to the vent. On the bed, pushed into the left side of the frame, a man sleeps. Mid-30s, unshaven, face turned partly toward the wall. The coarse motel blanket covers him to the chest, exposing one bare forearm laid across the pillow. His breathing is steady, the rise and fall of his shoulders rhythmic and calm. In the opposite corner, an old CRT television sits dead atop a low cabinet. The glass face reflects no light, a convex void in the monochrome frame. Above it, there's a stain with an oddly human outline, like someone once leaned there for hours. And then there's the door. Right edge of frame, the motel room's entrance. The latch is in place, but the door's not closed tight. A thin vertical gap runs from top to bottom, no thicker than a finger. In infrared, that gap is absolute black, deeper than any other shadow. For a full minute, nothing changes. The DVR's red indicator blinks in the bottom corner, steady as a metronome. The only movement is the curtain's random sway and the slow turn of the man's head against the pillow. Then, a shift. The curtain stirs again, but this time it's not the idle twitch of fabric in stale air. The bottom edge lifts slightly higher, pulling inward toward the bed. The air's movement is steady now, deliberate. The gap in the doorway remains, but the darkness within it feels heavier. The edges seem to pulse faintly in the IR haze. A sound slips into the feed, faint like metal brushing metal. It's so soft it almost blends into the hiss of the recording. The hinge doesn't groan. It whispers. The man doesn't stir. The camera's fixed gaze is unblinking. The autofocus doesn't adjust. It doesn't need to. It just watches. The curtain sways once more. The darkness in the gap seems to lean just slightly, as though whatever is beyond is shifting its weight toward the threshold. No movement inside the room yet, only that slow, steady encroachment of unseen air and the growing sense that the doorway's blackness isn't empty. The audio track picks up another sound. Software wet, almost like fingertips pressed to wood and sliding slowly down. The hiss in the background swallows most of it, but enough remains to be heard if you're listening for it. The man exhales, shifts under the blanket. His hand, pale in the IR, slips from beneath the cover for a moment before retreating. The red light blinks again. And then, stillness. The curtain freezes mid-sway, the air's pull cut off. The gap remains unaltered in size, yet the blackness inside seems thicker, as though it's closer to spilling into the room. Another whisper of metal, a hinge under strain. The feed keeps rolling. The DVR indicator flashes, the man sleeps. Just before the segment ends, a final noise, a small, deliberate push from the other side of the door, making the latch shiver in its frame. The curtain moves a fraction in response. The man does not wake. Camera 2, Room 6, Glenwood Motel, October 17th, 2:12 a.m. Infrared recording continues directly after the previous segment. The static clears on its own, the hiss fading back to the quiet, steady hum of the camera's feed. The picture stabilizes again, framing the same narrow seam of the door in the right edge of the shot. The gap hasn't closed. If anything, it seems a hair wider now, barely noticeable, but enough that the deep black inside is broken by something else. At first, it's nothing more than a shift in tone within the dark. The pitch of the black changes, like the faint difference between shadow and shadow. Then, the movement becomes clearer. In the infrared's green-gray wash, a shape resolves, low to the floor, indistinct at first, as if the camera can't decide where its edges are. It creeps forward from somewhere deep in the hallway beyond. The camera's IR throws an otherworldly outline around it, an uneven frame that quivers with each step. The limbs are the first thing you notice, 4 of them, long to the point of deformity. The elbows and knees rise high with each movement, joint angles sharp and wrong, jutting up like broken branches under thin skin. The thing moves in bursts, a slow trudge of 2 limbs, then the other 2, dragging the rest of its body in a low, deliberate crawl. It stops suddenly after each burst, head, or what might be its head, lifting slightly, as if sniffing the air or listening for something inside the room. In these pauses, it's completely still, frozen mid-motion like a creature that believes stillness equals invisibility. The hallway behind it is nothing but a smear of darker gray, no details, no depth, just the suggestion of space the camera can't quite penetrate. The IR light paints the creature's edges in faint halos, picking out the bones beneath the skin, the subtle twist of muscle and tendon each time it shifts forward. There's sound now, faint, barely there. The camera's microphone struggles with it, turning it into something filtered and thin, as though the noise is pushing against the limits of what the mic can register. A click, then another. Not loud, soft like fingernails tapping glass from a distance. Each click comes when the creature stops moving, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. The man in the bed is oblivious. His breathing is unchanged, slow and even. The blanket rises and falls in steady rhythm. The pillow cradles his head just so, keeping his face turned slightly away from the camera. But from the camera's perspective, there's no mistaking the geometry. The door, the hallway, the creeping shape, all perfectly aligned with the sleeping man's body. There is nothing between them. The creature would only need to crawl forward in a straight line to reach the bed. The air in the room seems thicker through the lens. Maybe it's an artifact of the IR, maybe just the way the camera struggles with contrast at the edges of its range, but the atmosphere looks weighted. Each particle in the beam appears to hang longer than it should, suspended like dust in syrup. The creature pauses again, its entire body low to the ground now. The joints fold in ways that defy a human silhouette. It's not quite on its belly. The torso arches slightly as though there's something rigid in its spine that prevents it from lying flat. Another click. This one closer, sharper in the microphone's range. The audio hisses around it, turning the sound into a grainy electric snap. The shape remains still for several seconds. Then, without warning, it surges forward faster than before, a silent glide that covers twice the distance of its earlier movements. The forelimbs stretch into the gap of the doorway, stopping just short of crossing the threshold. The head, still undefined, more a rounded shadow than a face, tilts toward the bed. The man doesn't stir. The camera watches. The red indicator light pulses. One forelimb rises slightly, the hand unfolding into long, narrow fingers. The IR catches their edges, showing the unnatural length and how they taper into dull, thick nails. The hand hovers for a moment, then extends the rest of the way into the room, breaking the invisible barrier of the doorway. The nails touch the floor first, slowly, deliberately. They press into the tile with the soft scrape of something testing its surface. The sound is faint, just enough for the microphone to catch, a gritty, dragging note like chalk on stone, but muted. The fingers curl, scratching lightly, tracing a short arc across the floor. The movement is slow enough that the sound stretches out, as though the creature wants it heard, wants it recorded. The camera's IR gleams faintly along the ridges of the nails as they lift again. The rest of its body hasn't crossed the doorway yet. It lingers there, half in and half out, as if weighing the next move. The pauses are deliberate, heavy with intent. Its hunched frame blocks most of the black seam now, the darkness of the hallway folding around it like a second skin. Another click. This one is different, not from the nails or the limbs, but from somewhere inside the body itself. A deeper, resonant sound, like a knuckle being flexed in reverse. The man shifts slightly in his sleep. One knee bends under the blanket. He sighs, a small, unconscious sound. The creature freezes completely, fingers still resting on the tile, head angled just enough toward the bed that the IR catches a flash, two pale points in the darkness where its eyes should be. The red light blinks. The nails begin to move again, slower now, dragging along the floor in a gentle, deliberate scrape, as if marking a line only it can see. And that's where the feed holds. The man is still asleep. The creature's hand is inside the room, and the doorway is no longer empty. Infrared security feed. Camera 2, Glenwood Motel, Room 6. Date stamp, October 17th, 2:13 a.m., picking up seconds after the last capture. The shot resumes exactly where the last feed ended, the creature's hand still inside the room, nails curved against the tile. For a long moment, nothing changes. The man on the bed doesn't stir. The red light on the DVR blinks. Then, without a single creak from the hinge, the door begins to open. Slowly. The gap widens by a few centimeters, enough to let in more of that blackness from the hall. There's no push of air, no visible draft, nothing to suggest wind or mechanical fault. It simply yields like something on the other side is parting it without effort. The frame stays steady. The camera doesn't shake, but the perspective feels subtly altered, as if the widening gap is pulling the rest of the room toward it. The creature moves. The hand that had been testing the floor slides forward with eerie precision. Each finger retracts in sequence, pressing into the tile, and the rest of the limb follows. The elbow lifts sharply as it advances, giving it a spider-like gait. The other forelimb emerges next, and with a slow, unbroken glide, the rest of its body comes into view. Its head is low, nearly brushing the floor. It's not simply looking down, it's angled, tilted unnaturally to one side, as though its neck is either broken or built wrong. In the infrared's cold palette, the skin is ghost pale, featureless except for the eyes. The eyes are bright. Not reflective like an animal's, but reactive. The IR bounces back from them in hard, blinding points of white. On the screen, they almost flare, blooming slightly against the grainy darkness, burning into the frame like overexposed film. It slides into the room one measured step at a time, each limb placing itself deliberately. The joints rise and fall with a strange grace, bones bending in ways human anatomy doesn't allow. Every movement is quiet enough that the camera's microphone picks up only the faint scrape of nails against tile. In its wake, the floor changes. It's subtle, a darkened print here, a smear there, but enough that the tiles behind it look wet, the kind of faint sheen you see after something damp passes over them. The marks evaporate slowly, as if they're not quite water. The doorway recedes behind it, the black seam swallowed by the creature's hunched frame. Already the room feels smaller. The camera's fixed angle hasn't shifted, but the space seems compressed, the air thicker. The walls feel closer together in the image, as though the very act of this thing crossing the threshold has bent the room's proportions. It keeps moving. The first pair of limbs plant near the edge of the bed, the second pair still on the stretch of tile between door and carpet. The head never rises. It tilts occasionally, a short, jerky motion, as though one ear is trying to catch something the other cannot. The man remains asleep, the blanket now pulled almost to his chin. His breathing is visible in the subtle rise of his back, steady and unaware. The creature advances until its entire body is inside. The door behind it doesn't swing shut. It stays ajar, the hallway's darkness pooling in through the gap, framing the intruder like a shadow inside a shadow. Its weight is oddly distributed. Every time it moves forward, the limbs shift just out of sync, creating a rolling motion through its spine that distorts its silhouette. The IR catches on the high ridges of its vertebrae, each one pushing against the skin in a neat row, like a chain under cloth. It leaves more of those faint, damp impressions as it goes. The marks aren't footprints, They have no defined shape, just irregular patches that seem to pulse faintly before fading. Halfway across the floor, it stops. The pause is so abrupt it looks like a freeze frame, but the faint flicker of the camera's grain proves it's still live. The head pivots, slowly, smoothly, until it's angled toward the camera. The eyes burn in the frame. They are impossibly white against the monochrome wash, sharp as cut glass, holding perfectly steady. The tilt of the head is strange, inquisitive, as though it's not just aware of being watched, but is studying the act of being watched itself. The air in the room seems to change again. On screen, it's only a slight deepening of the shadows in the corners, a dimming that eats away at the faintest highlights. In the moment, it feels like the temperature has dropped. The man still sleeps. The red light blinks. The thing's limbs flex once, just enough to shift its balance. Its eyes do not leave the lens. Glenwood Motel, Room 6, Security Camera 2. October 17th, 2:14 a.m. infrared mode, recording without interruption from the earlier footage. It remains there for a few seconds, still as a photograph, eyes locked into the lens, the long limbs planted on the dull tile like they have always belonged there. The red indicator light blinks again, cutting the feed into uneven pulses of light and shadow. The man in the bed shifts faintly, no more than a subtle roll of his shoulder under the coarse blanket. He is still far from waking. The creature moves first. Its head begins to turn, not in a quick snap, but with a slow, deliberate rotation, as though it's testing each degree of movement for sound. The tilt smooths out into a low bend, and its gaze leaves the camera, drifting toward the shape under the blankets. It doesn't raise its head. If anything, it lowers it, until its neck forms a curve, vertebrae standing out in distinct bumps beneath the thin stretch of skin. The motion continues down its body. The long spine arches and flexes, every vertebra jutting upward like the knuckles of a fist dragging beneath fabric. There's no fat, no softness, just a series of hard ridges moving under something barely thick enough to cover them. The overall effect is grotesque, like watching a length of rope pulled taut from within. Its limbs extend forward, slow enough that the IR frame almost blurs them. One forelimb lifts, the elbow jutting high, the hand unfolding into long fingers that stretch for the carpeted strip by the bed. When they land, the camera picks up a sound, not nails on tile this time, but the faint, almost apologetic groan of wood beneath thin carpet. Creak. The back limbs follow, each step perfectly in time with the shift of its weight. There's a rhythm to it. Creak, pause, creak, pause. The sound isn't loud, but in the silence of the room, it's an announcement, a declaration that it is here, and it is moving closer. The bed is in the center left of the frame now, with the man's head angled just far enough away that his face is hidden from the camera. The creature's approach is measured, never hurried, like there's no possibility of being stopped. As it moves, something strange happens with the feed. The sharp edges of the room begin to blur in the periphery, not because the lens is out of focus, but because the camera is fighting to keep the creature sharp. The autofocus motor hums faintly, a tiny mechanical whine buried in the static hiss, and the frame trembles by fractions of a degree. The creature's outline seems to resist being captured. Grain creeps in around its edges, crawling like static alive with its own intent. The rest of the image remains mostly clean, the wall stains, the blanket fibers, the motionless curtain, but around the thing, there's an instability, a halo of interference. Another step. Creak. The IR flare in its eyes is dimmer now, less like two burning points and more like faint coals behind a veil. Its head sways slightly as it advances, keeping low, as if reading the breathing pattern of the man on the bed. The man's chest rises, falls. He exhales audibly this time, a quiet, steady sigh. The creature stops. The spine ripples once, a full-body shiver contained beneath that skin stretched too thin. Its fingers flex on the carpet, nails catching faint glints in the IR before settling flat again. The camera's autofocus makes another tiny adjustment. The lens wavers, pulling sharpness into the creature's back first, then to the curve of its neck, then finally to the slight tilt of its head. The interference at the edges thickens, grain layering like clouds around it, making the background seem farther away than it is. Another step. Creak. The space between it and the bed is shrinking. The frame no longer holds both the door and the bed in full view. The thing's elongated form dominates the right half of the image. The blanket on the bed shifts slightly. The man rolls his knee inward, bending his leg beneath the covers. He doesn't wake. The creature moves again, but this time the head rises just a fraction, enough for the spine to extend fully, vertebrae aligning into a single jagged ridge from shoulders to pelvis. The body appears longer in this posture, unnervingly so, like a shadow stretched by a low light. Creak. The IR light catches the curve of its jaw now, a pale, sharp line leading down to the suggestion of a mouth that hasn't opened yet. The grain in the feed thickens briefly, then thins, as though the camera is struggling to process what it sees. The creature pauses. The angle of its head shifts slightly, first left, then right, in small, bird-like movements, listening for something unseen. Its limbs lock in place during this pause, fingers curled slightly into the carpet. Creak. The sound is quieter this time, but the body moves closer. Its shoulders are nearly level with the side of the mattress now, the curve of its spine tapering into darkness beyond the frame. The man's breathing is steady. The camera's red light pulses. Another step, slower than the last. The head tilts upward just enough that the eyes flare again in the IR, catching the light in two narrow, perfect reflections. The grain thickens sharply around them, as if the act of looking toward the lens is distorting the feed itself. The room seems smaller now, not because the camera has zoomed, but because the space between the bed and the wall has been consumed by its presence. The walls feel closer, the air heavier, the shadows deeper. The creature takes one more step. The creak is barely audible this time, swallowed by the faint hum of the DVR. The head lowers again, spine curling. Its eyes remain fixed on the man under the blanket, unwavering, bright points in a tunnel of shadow. The distance between them is no more than the span of a single stride. Less than a meter. Now, patio. Camera 2, positioned in room 6 of the Glenwood Motel. October 17th, 2:14:37 a.m. infrared mode remains engaged. Next in sequence. The footage resumes without a break. The creature is already fully upright now, having uncoiled from its crawl with the same disturbing fluidity it used to enter the room. Its frame towers over the bed, gaunt and elongated. In the infrared's cold spectrum, it is almost skeletal. Thin limbs like iron rods under stretched fabric, shoulders too narrow for the length of its arms, spine still ridged in hard knots down its back. Standing like this, it is taller than the headboard by at least half a meter. The man under the blanket looks almost childlike in comparison. It leans forward with slow precision, vertebrae flexing one after the other as if some invisible hand is pushing it down. The head tilts slightly to one side, the neck's angle far sharper than human bone should allow. Now, the camera's focus rests squarely on its face. Face is a generous term. There are no brows, no cheekbones to speak of. Just a pale expanse of skin-like surface stretched smooth over a skull shape that feels wrong. The only interruptions are its eyes, two circles of violent white in the monochrome image, and a mouth that hangs slightly open. The mouth does not show teeth. Inside is only blackness and not the shallow dark of a closed throat. It's a depth without end, a void that the IR light refuses to touch, as if the space behind those lips is larger than the head itself. The darkness there seems to absorb the air around it, swallowing the fine grain of the image until the edges dissolve. The head lowers further until the eyes are level with the camera's lens height. In reality, that means it's within 20 centimeters of the sleeping man's head. The man breathes evenly, oblivious. His hair shifts faintly with each breath, a fragile rhythm that feels far too vulnerable under that gaze. Then the microphone picks up something new, a sound layered beneath the usual hiss. It's a breath, but it's wrong. Not warm, not human. It's long and steady, but there's no softness to it, no warmth you'd expect from air moving out of lungs. This breath sounds cold, not just in tone, but in presence, as if the air itself is being chilled in the act of passing through. The low hum of the DVR almost fades behind it, the sound dominating the silence. The creature holds there, unmoving, just breathing over the man's face. Its head tilts in micro-movements, left, right, almost imperceptible, studying. Around its edges, the image begins to degrade. The static grain blooms and contracts in irregular pulses, not from interference, but from proximity. The closer it leans, the more unstable the recording becomes. The background loses clarity. The curtains dissolve into a haze of pixelated green-gray. The wall stains become shapeless shadows. The bed itself seems to blur at its outline where the thing's shadow falls. It stays like this for a full 20 seconds. Blink, the DVR timestamp advances. Blink, the red light in the corner pulses. Blink, the man exhales again. Then, a new movement. One of its arms bends at the elbow, the joint rising unnaturally high, almost shoulder level, and the hand begins to extend toward the edge of the blanket. The fingers are too long, and in the IR light, they are bone pale. The nails appear darker, thicker, catching no reflection. The hand moves slowly, so slowly it feels intentional, as if it's mimicking the pace of a falling leaf. The fingers reach the blanket's edge near the man's neck and slip just underneath the fold. The fabric reacts instantly. A subtle lift, less than an inch, but enough to show the intent. The nails do not snag the material. They slide smoothly beneath it, as if they have done this before. The breathing remains steady, both the man's warm, shallow inhales and the creature's cold, deliberate exhales. It begins to pull. The blanket shifts upward in the frame by centimeters, loosening its contour over the man's chest. The edge closest to the camera lifts enough that the IR light flattens it into a glowing ridge. The creature pauses mid-motion. The man stirs. A twitch in his legs under the blanket. His head turns slightly toward the opposite wall. The hand freezes. The nails rest against the underside of the blanket, perfectly still. The eyes, however, remain locked, not on the man, but on the camera. For 1 second, the flare from the IR seems to brighten in them, as if acknowledging the lens. The timestamp advances again. 2:14:58. The man sighs in his sleep, pulling the blanket tighter around himself without realizing. The movement forces the creature's hand out of position. It doesn't resist, simply retracts in the same slow, deliberate way it extended. The arm folds back into the creature's frame, and it straightens slightly, head still cocked, still staring. The air between it and the man feels charged, the space dense with something unseen. The cold breath continues. The DVR indicator blinks once more, and the image hangs there. A towering figure at the side of the bed, face blank except for those burning white eyes and that bottomless mouth, standing so close you could mistake it for a shadow if it weren't for the way it breathes. Security feed from Camera 2, Glenwood Motel, Room 6. Time code 2:15:12 a.m., October 17th. Infrared capture. Continuous recording resumed from previous log. The feed resumes without distortion, but the frame feels subtly altered, not in angle, but in presence. The sleeping man has rolled onto his side, now facing the creature. He's still deep under, eyes closed, breath steady, the blanket drawn loosely around his waist. The movement has placed his head a mere 20 centimeters from the edge of the mattress where the thing stands. The creature doesn't react with surprise. Instead, it tilts its head a fraction more to the side, vertebrae shifting under the pale tension of its skin. The movement is fluid but deliberate, as though it's curious rather than startled. One hand lifts from where it has been hanging limp at its side. Slowly, without tremor, it comes forward and settles on the edge of the man's pillow. The IR light flares across it, illuminating every unnatural detail. The hand is too long, too thin, with fingers in disproportion to the palm. The skin is stretched so tightly over the bones that the blue-green tracery of veins is starkly visible in the monochrome wash. They thread across the back of the hand like a map of some alien river system. The nails are long and thick, the edges dulled rather than sharp, giving them a weight that feels less like keratin and more like something calcified. They catch no glint from the IR. They simply absorb it, matte and dark, drinking in the light. The fingers rest against the pillow's fabric, and the faint give of the cushion shows how little weight it applies. Still, the proximity is suffocating. The man's temple is inches away from those nails. The rest of the room seems to fade in the frame. It's not a loss of light, but a loss of detail. The stains on the wall behind the bed blur into indistinct shadows. The curtain's weave disappears into a flat gray mass. Even the edge of the TV cabinet seems to dissolve. Only the bed, the man, and the thing beside him remain sharply defined, as if the camera's focus has been pulled forcibly to them and nowhere else. The creature's head lowers slightly, neck bending in a slow arc. Its eyes, still those hard, overexposed circles in the IR spectrum, fix entirely on the man's face. The mouth remains open just enough to show the endless black inside, no teeth, no tongue, no texture. The man's breathing deepens for a moment, his chest rising higher beneath the blanket. His lips part faintly in his sleep, a soft murmur escaping that the microphone doesn't quite catch. The creature's hand tightens imperceptibly on the pillow. The long fingers flex once, skin stretching over tendons, the nails dipping fractionally into the fabric. The IR camera catches the tension in the knuckles as they rise under the skin, the veins standing out like dark cords. The edges of the frame warp again. Not a glitch, more like the background is being pushed away from the lens. There's no depth left in the shot, only the compressed intimacy of the two figures. Its head tilts lower still, vertebrae along the spine shifting in sequence. The line of its back arches, shoulder blades pressing against the thin membrane of skin as it folds itself down toward the bed. The breathing changes, not the man's, but the creature's. It grows quieter, more drawn out, each inhale a slow siphon of air, each exhale almost imperceptible but carrying a faint hiss. The microphone captures it faintly, filtered through the static hum of the DVR. The man shifts again in his sleep, his forehead turning just enough that it almost brushes the creature's knuckles. His eyelashes tremble briefly, then settle. The creature does not flinch, its eyes lower, aligning perfectly with the level of the man's closed lids. In the IR, the white of its gaze is so intense it blooms against the grain, faint streaks of light bleeding into the surrounding pixels. For several seconds they remain there, one breathing warm and unaware, the other cold and utterly still. The room beyond might as well not exist. The camera has forgotten it. The creature leans in another fraction, the curve of its spine deepening, the ridges along its back shifting under the thin, pale stretch of skin. The mouth remains open, black as ever, drawing the eye into its depth until the rest of the frame feels peripheral. The man exhales again, the warm breath just grazing the creature's unmoving face. The timestamp ticks forward. 2 மணி 15 நிமிடம் 19 வினாடி. 2 மணி 15 நிமிடம் 20 வினாடி. 2 மணி 15 நிமிடம் 21 வினாடி. The creature doesn't move. It simply stares, eyes unblinking, fixed in perfect alignment with the man's shut eyes. The kind of proximity that would be a violation if either were awake, a distance too close for anything but intent. And just before the segment ends, its free hand begins to rise slowly from its side, moving toward the blanket near the man's hip. Glenwood Motel, Room 6, Security Camera 2. October 17th, 2:15:28 a.m., infrared mode still active, carrying on from where we left off. The feed picks up right where the last segment ended. The creature still crouched at the bedside, hand hovering near the man's hip beneath the blanket. Then, without warning, the image shivers. A horizontal scan line rolls from the top of the frame to the bottom, dragging the picture out of alignment for a heartbeat. The audio pops with a soft, wet tick, like a fingernail against glass. The line disappears. The feed sharpens again, but the creature is no longer beside the bed. In that blink of stability, it's standing at the foot of the mattress, its spine arched forward, head low, arms dangling toward the sheets. Another ripple. This time, 2 lines roll through, distorting the IR image into staggered bands. The man remains asleep, unchanged between cuts, but the thing moves. When the frame clears for half a second, it's back to the left side of the bed, body folded low, face close to the man's chest. Its eyes blaze brighter in the distortion's wake, blooming with artificial flare. The sound degrades with the picture. The usual hiss of the DVR deepens, breaking into a coarse static that surges and retreats like heavy wind against a microphone. Underneath, there's a faint irregular pulse, 3 short bursts, then silence. 3 short bursts, then silence. Almost like a mimicry of the clicks from the diary entries. Another burst of noise, sharper now, a crackling pop that makes the audio spike, and the image warps again. In this flash, the creature is turned away from the bed entirely, its back to the man, head angled toward the door it came through. The frame is so unstable that its outline seems doubled, like the camera is capturing 2 slightly offset versions of it at once. The next clear moment is worse. It's facing the camera. The eyes are still too bright, but now they're framed by an expression, or something pretending to be one. The mouth is open far wider than before, stretched to an inhuman proportion. There are no teeth, no tongue, just that same absolute darkness. But the size of it now feels impossible. It occupies nearly the entire lower half of its face, as if the jaw unhinged like a snake's. The distortion worsens, horizontal lines crawling constantly now, breaking the image into jagged slices. The static in the audio becomes a deep warbling drone. Occasionally, a low thump punctuates the hum, not loud but heavy, like a distant door closing. The creature moves in ways the eye can't follow, not because it's too fast, but because the feed keeps collapsing around it. In 1/2 second of clarity, its arm is stretched toward the man's ankle. In the next, it's crouched low against the far wall. In the next, it's inches from the camera, though that should be impossible given its fixed ceiling mount. Every reappearance feels like a violation of continuity, as though the footage itself is being rewritten while it's still recording. The man remains completely still through it all. His breathing never changes. The blanket doesn't shift. He could be a photograph in this sequence, trapped in the same frame while everything else rearranges itself around him. Another moment of clarity. The creature's eyes lock onto the lens again. This time, the flare blooms into overexposure so strong it leaves ghost impressions on the screen, as if the image has burned into the DVR's buffer. The mouth opens wider still, the edges nearly reach the sides of its head. The black inside seems to spill into the air around it, devouring the IR light, creating a halo of absence. Then the distortion peaks. Horizontal bands fill the entire frame, rolling so fast that the image is barely visible between them. Each fleeting glimpse shows the creature in a new position, looming over the man, standing at the curtain, half vanished into the wall by the door. In one frame, its limbs are bent backward at impossible angles, its head completely inverted, the eyes still level with the lens. The sound is a roar of static now, layered with mechanical squeals and deep bass rumbles that don't belong to any equipment in the room. Occasionally, a high, insect-like whine cuts through, sharp enough to make the recording meter peak. And then, almost nothing. The distortion collapses inward, shrinking until only the center of the frame is visible. In that narrow window, everything else is pitch black. The man's sleeping form is gone. The bed is gone. The room is gone. Only the eyes remain. 2 hard, brilliant white points, steady and unblinking. They float in the dark without depth or shadow, fixed exactly where the camera's focus rests. The audio falls to near silence, save for a faint, slow inhale. The timestamp freezes for a moment, then jumps forward 1 second. Final segment in this series. Camera 2, Glenwood Motel, Room 6. October 17th, 2:15:39 a.m. infrared recording, following the previous footage without break. The feed comes back without a fade or transition, just there, as though the camera had never stopped. The IR view is washed in dull gray greens, the bed and the figure on it sharp in the center frame, the walls pressed in by the wide-angle lens. At first, nothing moves, but then the edges of the image tremble. It's subtle at first, the kind of minute shake that could be caused by an overworked hard drive or a loose mount. But it's too rhythmic. Every 3 seconds, a ripple courses from one corner of the frame to the other, bending the vertical lines of the walls ever so slightly. The curtain sways, even though the air should be still. The headboard elongates just a hair, shrinking back before the eye can focus on it. Then it builds. The trembling turns into a shudder that seems to roll under the skin of the picture itself. The walls arch inward, the mattress curves unnaturally upward in the middle, pulling the sleeping man's body into a shallow cradle. The headboard stretches like taffy, its straight lines bowing until they look almost liquid. The window frame on the far wall warps into a cruel crescent, as if the glass has been poured into the shape of a blade. This is not the room moving, it's the recording, the digital image, being twisted by something beyond the lens, as though unseen hands are wringing the footage like a soaked rag. The distortion deepens, thickening the air inside the feed. Objects smear into pale streaks that drag across the screen in opposite directions before snapping back into alignment. The man's body becomes a horizontal smear, a pale ghost stretched across the bed. The thing beside the bed, the thing that should be one shape, splits into jagged, disjointed fragments. Its limbs appear in 2-3 places at once, their outlines tangling like roots, before disentangling just enough for the mind to register a form again. The sound follows. The faint static that has underscored the entire recording mutates into a low, grinding hiss. It's unbroken, a single sustained breath of machinery, pitched so deep it seems to hum against the bones of the listener's skull. Beneath it, there's a vibration, not quite audible, but heavy, the kind of low frequency you feel more than hear. The feed spasms violently. The bed frame doubles in height, stretches toward the ceiling, then snaps back. Every object in the room appears to be pulled in 2 directions at once, as if the image itself is caught between competing gravitational forces. And then, the click. It hides at first inside the hiss, just a hair louder than the static. A mechanical tap, but drawn out unnaturally, dragged into a long, uneven syllable. Not the sharp punctuation of a camera shutter, but a stretched metallic click pulled across the spectrum until it bleeds into the static. The distortion worsens. Each frame no longer ends cleanly. Instead, they smear into the next, leaving ghostly afterimages burned into the motion like damaged film. The man's features dissolve until his face is a pale, smooth oval. The creature becomes a stuttering collage of anatomy. One frame shows its head at the man's feet, the next has it looming over his pillow, and the next, impossibly, places its face inches from the camera lens itself. All of these positions occur within the same breath, the same second, defying space entirely. The hiss swells, and with it, the click grows more insistent. It repeats, each time dragging longer, bending in pitch until it sounds like a strained wire threatening to snap. Then, a snap back to focus. For half a second, the distortion clears. In that instant, the creature's face is plain, eyes blazing white under the infrared, fixed and unblinking. The mouth gapes into a perfect oval of black, an emptiness too deep for the shape of the skull. It's wider than before, stretching well beyond what bone and skin should allow. The edges of the frame bow inward toward that void, as if the recording is being sucked into it, pixel by pixel. The click becomes deafening, elongated into a tone that refuses to break, the last breath before a scream that never comes. And then, without warning, the feed breaks. The picture cuts to total black. The hiss stops so completely it feels like the air in the room has been taken away. 3 seconds of absolute silence follow. Then, in the center of the screen, faint mechanical text flickers into being. The letters pulse once, dim and sickly, before holding steady. Somewhere underneath that visual, almost beneath the hearing range, another sound bleeds in. It's not static now, not mechanical. It's human, or something trying to imitate human. A whisper, drawn out in 3 beats, quiet enough that it almost slips away. Stay awake. The words are swallowed almost immediately by the black, but their presence lingers, not just in the recording, but in the mind. curling into thought like a seed taking root. It doesn't feel like it was meant for the man in the bed. It feels like it was meant for whoever is watching this now. The screen holds the signal lost message for another 10 seconds, the black edges of the frame seeming to close in on the words. Then, without fade or warning, the recording cuts completely. Darkness. Silence. Nothing else.